Hello everybody, I am Ben from Team Panic, and today we're going to be looking at how my 13 kilo angled bar spinner very obvious did at Australian Nationals for 2019. So before we jump into some fights, there are a few kind of little bits and pieces that happened before those. And also I would like to thank Harley from Creative Instigation for helping me out with some of the filming on this one. He's a fellow Roboteer and fellow YouTuber. And he has his own channel, which I will link on the end screen and in the description down below. After you're done watching this video, if you want more Australian Nationals, I'm pretty sure he will be putting out his own video on that sometime in the future. So go and give him a sub and you'll get to see more Australian Nationals. So also, when we got there for the first time, there was a few bits and pieces that happened during safeties and weigh-ins and all of that kind of stuff. First of all, we have more weight in the weapon blade this year, but we are still a kilo underweight with this guy. So we could have gone up to a 4 kilo weapon bar and still been totally fine and totally underweight. But I think I would want to use the weight a little bit differently, and we'll talk about kind of what I would want to do with it at the end of this video. Also, when we were doing the weapon spin-up test for the first time, a couple of things happened. First of all, the weapon wasn't all that great on spin-up in terms of it wasn't all that fast to actually kick up and get spinning. And then secondly, it was unbalanced. And I think that was because I got the weapons cut with a group order and we didn't specify laser cutting. So there's a possibility that they were plasma cut and the plasma cut job was just bad, I guess. I'm not really sure, I'm not an expert on these things, but it did seem a bit rough and it was unbalanced, especially on the bar, which should have been perfectly balanced straight out of CAD. So that was a little bit annoying, and it also meant that the tip speed that we got wasn't accurate because my robot vibrated away from the testing apparatus before it was up to full speed. So they calculated that I was about a third of the tip speed limit, but that doesn't really mean anything. However, the blade definitely was not going at the full tip speed limit for this year. That was something that I knew was going to happen when I changed down to a 4S system in last video where I did my upgrades to this guy. Anyway, let's jump straight on into the fight. So the first fight up is against Pothead, which is a low flat robot with an undercutting blade right in the middle of it. It's an interesting design because it is used in both open class and in sportsman's class. They just changed the blade out for a saw when running it in the sportsman's class. And also it has a nice big pot on the top with googly eyes, which I always like googly eyes on combat robots. They don't quite work on very obvious, otherwise he would have them everywhere. Anyway, let's take a look at how this fight goes.
3, 2, 1, fight.
So, those spin-up issues came back again. I was definitely slow to get going, and it was basically a case of learning where the throttle needed to be to get the motor to, first of all, spin in the right direction, and then once it was spinning in the right direction, where I needed to hit to get the weapon up to a full speed. Now, the other thing that happened too is that I kept hitting Pothead. This is not usually my style when it comes to robot combat. If somebody is crab walking, I typically leave them alone. However, I was getting the weapon up to a good speed for the first time and wanted to test out the bar. B, it is a event in front of a paid audience, so I wanted to give them the money, their money's worth out of that fight. And C, which I guess really should have been A, I did ask the driver of Pothead if I was allowed to keep hitting him, and he said yes. So I did then go ahead and do that. The one that I asked about was the very, very last hit. The rest of the hits, he was still kind of crab walking, still kind of trying to be in the fight, so I kept hitting him. And then, yeah, of course, the last one where he was a little bit more dead against the wall, that was the one that I did ask, and he did say that I could keep hitting him. So that was that fight. It was a good fight. Like I said, it was a little bit frustrating trying to get the weapon up to speed, but once we got it there, it wasn't too bad. Now, Australian Nationals is a 2-day event, and you are basically, the first day is all about qualifying for finals, which happens on the second day. So the idea is that you fight 2 fights on the first day. If you win both of those fights, then you make it through into the finals immediately on day 2. If you lose both of those fights, you're out, you're done. And if you win one and you lose one, you're into a decider fight to see if you get into the finals. Now, on 1 win and no losses off 1 fight, we are either going straight through into the finals or we're going to get a decider fight. So let's see who our next competitor is and work out how we're going to get into the finals, if we're going to get into the finals. So our next competitor is Rumblebee, who was actually seeded 2nd this year, having come 4th last year. However, 2nd and 3rd from last year did not return, so Rumblebee is catapulted all the way up to 2nd seed. They are a nice compact drum spinner with Hardox armor all the way around and a sprung wedge flipper at the sprung wedge. It's not really a flipper, it's just a sprung wedge that makes sure that the wedge is always on the ground, always at the right angle, always getting in underneath people to get that tiny, it's a tiny, tiny little drum, but it gets a lot of purchase thanks to that sprung flipper. So obviously, going into this one, I was a little bit nervous. My weapon wasn't spinning up very well, and they are 4th place from last year, so they do pretty well. Let's take a look at this one.
It's 15 seconds remaining.
Ah.
7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. That was right at the end.
Yep. So we had the weapon spin up issues again. In fact, I barely got the blade moving in that fight before going upside down. Now, upside down we can drive as you just saw, but I can't self-right. So that's probably where I want to spend my extra kilo, is some form of self-righting mechanism on this thing that allows me to get back on my wheels after being thrown upside down like that. Because of course, I'm a bit of a sitting duck when I'm upside down. The fact that I'm still able to move, but I'm not able to spin my weapon, means that when they have a weapon like he did, he can just go to town. And there are a bunch of nicks up here in the weapon pulley where he's hit that. There was a bunch of nicks on the weapon itself. There's a bunch of nicks all over the chassis where he's hit that. But I mean, the robot held up and survived pretty well, which is great because these are the first real hits that anybody's actually got on the physical body of Very, Very Obvious. There were some cuts last year with an overhead saw, but nothing with a high impact weapon like this, and the chassis held up, so that's a good start to all of this. Now, when I was upside down, there was a very worrying section there because I was upside down and Rumblebee, he was driving and he had a teammate there and his teammate said, "Go for the wheels!" And I was like, ah! Because these wheels that we're running at the moment are my squidgy TPU 3D printed ones. And up until this fight, they'd never been tested. They'd never been hit by anything. I was pretty confident they were going to hold up, but I had no real idea. And they did. They actually held up. So, I mean, that's a good thing because I did not bring any spares of these. Normally I do, but I was in a rush to pack and left them at home. Yeah, so I got hit on the wheels. And what happened to the TPU? Nothing. There's literally not a scratch or mark or cut in the actual TPU here. But what happened was the tire, the bike tire that I've glued and screwed around the outside edge, got ripped off. And it actually got ripped off and then caught up inside his weapon, up in around where his belt actually runs the weapon, and tangled all on up in there, and quite badly as well. So that was the thing that disabled his weapon, was the tire off my wheel. I then went over to him after the fight and got that back. And to get that back, we actually had to like unroll it out of the drum by turning the drum by hand to get the thing to come back out again. It was really wedged in there. There was no way it was coming back out while the robot was in the arena like that. So that was kind of a good thing for me because it meant that he stopped hitting me, but yeah, it definitely wasn't intended, and it did leave me a little bit crippled because obviously I then only had traction on one side, so maybe stronger glue is needed for these things next year to make sure that doesn't come off. But like I said, it's glued and screwed, so it really, really should not have come off, but kind of glad that it did in the end. So obviously that one did actually last the full 3 minutes. I did end up stuck, but I wasn't counted out because the fight was over before the count out finally finished. But I mean, you could see where that one was going to go from the judge's perspective. My weapon basically didn't move and I was upside down for 90% of the fight, so we lost that one, basically. And it meant that we had to go into a redemption fight. So the redemption fight was on day 2, which gave me a little bit of time to tweak and repair. The first thing I did was change over the weapon motor just in case that was the cause of our weapon spin-up issues. And then of course I also moved over to the single tooth blade because we're up against Stormfront now, and Stormfront is a very powerful vertical spinner out of Melbourne. It's made by Michael and Luke, who, if you've been around on my channel for a while, you've probably seen them. They've come over to Hybrid World. They are the runners of MCR, which I've been to a couple of times, so you have seen their robots, you've known their robots. These guys do build interesting beasts of machines, and like I said, this is a powerful vertical spinner, so I went with my single tooth design because that is best up against a vertical spinner. Basically, it means that there is less chance that they catch you because there's only a small tooth out here and there is no tooth out here for them to catch and throw you over with, basically. So yeah, going into this one, I was a little bit worried because I had to basically rebalance this whole weapon in the pits there, and basically sat it between two tables and tried to get the thing to balance out. Now, there was a couple of times where I was like, oh, I've almost got this balanced, and then I found out that I actually had a extra piece of damage from Rumblebee that I hadn't seen, and that was the cage of one of the bearings got crushed in, and it meant that when I was trying to balance the weapon, the crushed bearing was actually the thing slowing down the weapon, and not the fact that I was getting closer to actually having a balanced blade. So it took me a lot longer than it should have to balance this weapon, A, because I was doing it very rushed and very unequipped at an event, and B, because I had a damaged bearing in there. So I actually went to Michael and Stormfront and asked for some bearing grease so that I could run some of the old bearings from last year that were starting to rust and just stick a little bit. Thankfully, they were nice enough to give me some bearing grease, and we got everything up and running for this fight. So let's take a look at it. So the weapon spin up issue is kind of still there, kind of. I mean, it span up a lot better in this fight than it has in previous fights, but it's still not as good as I would like. It's also not getting up to a decent clip anymore, I don't think. It's getting up pretty high, but not hugely high. So halfway through that fight too, we hit them hard enough that damage from a previous fight caused the pulley on their motor to snap off. In actual fact, it was welded to the shaft of the motor, so the motor shaft itself was the thing that snapped, and that's how they lost their weapon. Then, of course, we hit them again on one side, and that crippled up that drive a little bit. However, they were able to, through some good driving, manage to get a good crab walk going and actually maneuver across the arena. And then finally got the weapon up to a good enough speed that we did some real damage, which is this guy. We actually ripped off a side panel. This is, I don't know, 4 or 5 mil thick titanium. The whole robot was titanium, which kudos for, welding up titanium and getting that to work. But yeah, there we go. We managed to rip off a whole piece and do some pretty serious damage up the front here along the way. So pretty happy about this. This is a very, very cool piece of titanium. I might have to build this into a robot at some point, but for the near future, I think it's going to live up on the shelf behind me as a little trophy. It's a very, very cool piece, and they do a very good job of painting up their robots. So this has got a nice bit of paint job on there as well. So we've gone through. We won that fight. We've won our redemption fight. And we're on through into the finals now, which is really, really cool. And having thought that I've gone up against the second seed robot already, I thought, maybe first round of the finals, we're going to have a bit of an easier time of it. Things are going to go pretty well. Maybe we can get up through further into the finals. Yeah, we got up against the number 1 seed. We went up against last year's winner, Bender 3. This is a very powerful horizontal spinner, which has been ripping holes in things basically all weekend. Yeah, so with my weapon spin-up issues, I was very, very nervous going into this fight. So much so that I did nothing to the robot. I left the robot as it was because I knew that this setup was working at least somewhat well, and the blade was spinning up a little bit faster today, or that day, so I just left it. The single tooth is not a great choice against a horizontal, but I knew it worked, so I wasn't going to mess with the good thing. I was just going to let it go and run straight on into this fight. So the spin up was better in that fight, and we killed his weapon. Like, what? We managed to kill his weapon. We killed his weapon with an exceptionally lucky shot. We managed to get an upward glance up into his bearing race, well, it's not his bearing race, but his bearing housing, and we managed to dent that inwards so much that the bearing seized up. And when the bearing seized up, the belt tensioner then seized up the motor, making it draw too much current, and it burnt out the ESC and also the motor, which was that big plume of smoke that happened in the middle there. So I should say we lost that fight. Just so we'll go back to the actual decision there. We lost that fight. That fight went a full 3 minutes and it went to the judges. It was a split decision, but we very, very narrowly lost that fight. And the thing that tipped it over the edge for us was that we lost drive in the final minute or final 30 seconds of that fight. The first kind of minute and a half, 2 minutes were basically my fight, but then that last section of the fight, I lost drive because he was controlling me, pushing me into the walls, stopping me from getting the weapon spun up. And I knew that might have been an issue with this design. We had thin 3mm sections of aluminium that were tapped to thread onto the motor shaft, and that's how we were transferring the power from the motors out through the wheels and to push robots around. So I knew that that was a weak system, and me sitting here right now talking to you, I know logically in my brain that that's a weak system, but then in the heat of the battle, in the heat of combat, the only thing in my brain when he was pushing me into the wall was push back, get free, get the weapon spun up. Those three things just on a loop in my head, going round and round and round and round and round. And I did those things, or I tried to do those things, and I ended up stripping out those thin little 3mm thick aluminium sections, and that meant that I stopped moving. So right at the end there, I was stuck against the wall. Basically, as far as I know, nobody knows when those things stripped out, not even me. So it's very possible that if he had backed up earlier and just left me up against the wall, I would have stayed there and I would have been counted out the whole 10 seconds. But as it stands, he didn't do that. But still, that was kind of tipped the judge's decision away from me, because he then had some damage done on me and he had a lot of control and a lot of aggression, especially in that last little bit, which, you know, the last piece of the fight is a lot of what judges lock in their memory, the last bit that they see. And if they see you being pushed around all over the place, it's not going to end well for you. Also, that's combat robots, right? Like, it doesn't matter how well you think you did in a fight. If you leave it up to a judge's decision, it can go either way. A judge's decision is a difficult thing. I don't envy judges at all. They have a very difficult job to do. And of course, they're sitting at a different perspective. They see the arena differently. They see the fights differently. And at the end of the day, they have to make a difficult call. And yeah, if you let it go to the judges, it can go either way, regardless of how much you think you won or didn't win. So, and in this case, it is what it is. I don't really feel all that bad about losing it. He did really dominate that last section of the fight, and as I said, my drive system was very stripped out. So he really should have won that one anyway, but he was being a bit too aggressive. So, you know, even more aggression points. But at the end of the day, that means that we're out of the finals. We've now lost our only fight in the finals and we are done. However, as the finals go on, there are grudge matches that happen, and I signed up because they wanted more grudge matches, and they wanted more grudge matches from robots with weapons that were working. My weapon was working, my wheels weren't, so I quickly changed these out to a backup system that I had, and I was put in against Wanda. Wanda is a thwackbot with a tow ball attached to some chain, which has been very, very effective in the past at killing spinners. It has been around for a while, and it is just known for getting in and kind of hitting belts and weapons and things and just jamming stuff up and stopping spinners. So it was a bit of an interesting one for me to face. I was hoping that I was going to get the big tires on the outside, but I was also kind of fearing the tow ball just a little bit. Let's take a look at this one. Or not, because in my hasty repair of the wheels, one of the bolts didn't go in properly and the wheel fell off in front of a live audience. So that was fun. And once again, thanks to Harley from Creative Instigations, who filmed that and then also rushed over and filmed me putting the wheel back on. So they put a different fight in the arena. Basically, they put 2 extra robots in with Wanda, made it a 3-way melee, And I was kind of worried that I wasn't going to get another fight. However, I got the wheels back on really quickly and was able to join into the next three-way fight, which was against myself, Badger, who is a full body shell spinner, and then also Bob, which is a horizontal spinner made by the same team as Rumblebee, and it's just made of bits and bobs they had lying around, hence the name. So these are both really powerful robots that could have really interesting spinning weapons. This one should be a pretty explosive little three-way rumble. Let's take a look.
We get this fight underway. In 3, 2, 1, fight! All the robots are spinning up. Oh, the first hit by very obvious on Badger.
But he was still right with that hole.
Oh, big hit on Badger. And there goes that 2. The 2 is gone on Badger. Now it's unbalanced. That shell will vibrate around where it tries to spin. Very obvious. Up to full speed. And a big hit.
Looks like Bob is starting that weapon. That's that weapon thrower.
Oh, the weapon is spinning very briefly on Bob. It has to stop.
Very obvious. Looking into the hole of his fight so far.
Picking and choosing his hits. Driving around the arena.
And it's still functional, but it's very unbalanced as it spins up.
2 minutes remaining in this right match. Oh, very obvious. Throwing this robot around the arena with glancing blows on Bob.
And they're trying to make its way over to his opponent.
Really,
spin up.
the driver very obvious. He's being very fair. He's doing a hit on Bob and then a hit on Badger. Oh, now there's no teeth on Badger. Now it's balanced. Now I can spin it back up to full speed.
Halfway through this fight.
It's going to do some grinding. Oh, and a big hit. Very obvious on Badger, but he's still at full speed. Bob definitely having some issues here.
Bob looks like still see that weapon blade twisting, but just not able to get it started. With brushless motors, there is opposition speeding up the weapon.
It's hard to get them spinning, but once they are up to speed, you get some incredible power from them.
1 minute remaining.
1 minute remaining in this fight. All robots are still mobile, but very obvious. The only one with a working weapon at this point. Some dints and dings on the side of Badger, but without his teeth, it can't do much to retaliate.
Very good. Looking at the line, earlier false start.
Being very cautious of that spinner, but dishing out good hits and actually very stable. You're not seeing the gyroscopic precession affecting it too much at this stage.
Just taking on the front of Bob there with another big hit.
15 seconds remaining in this right match fight. All the robots still mobile.
Badger attacking, but unable to do any damage.
Another leap from very obvious.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
That's the match. We've got a decision.
So the GoPro was down for that fight. It kind of clapped out right as I was swapping over my drive motors, or like fixing that drive system up. So once again, thanks to Harley for that footage that you just saw. Yeah, this one was interesting because I had the weapon up. For the whole fight, which was really good. But it also did seem to slow down towards the end there. And when I pulled the robot apart, I found out why. The can started to come off the motor shaft. It has slid out and down this way. I can like basically stick my finger in between the base of the thing and the actual can of the motor, which is not good. That is not what that is supposed to look like in any way, shape, or form. So that motor actually lost some of its power in that fight, and that's why you were seeing that I was up to what I thought like what was full speed for the weapon, slamming into people, and the weapon was stopping straight. Yeah, it shouldn't stop fully like that. I mean, that means that we're getting full energy transfer, but it also means that like getting full energy transfer is what you really want, but at the same time, it also means that you're probably underpowered, because especially for us, when we were spinning that slowly, we were definitely underpowered, because what you should have is you should have a full weapon stop and the robots should fly away from each other. That means that you've got all your energy into a hit and you've got enough energy into a hit. But in our case, we're having like full weapon stop and the robots were staying tangled together, which means that there wasn't as much energy in those hits. So definitely something that I want to work on in the future. I mean, we did win that fight. It was just a grudge match, but hey, we did win that one. And that was mostly because we had the weapon up the whole 3 minutes. We just kept hitting people the whole 3 minutes. We got both of Badger's teeth, which is really cool. It's always interesting because Badger had like one tooth that was kind of a bit finicky all weekend. And if it lost it in a fight, they just kept spinning and just like gyro dancing all over the arena, which was really fun to see. And I did want both of those teeth this weekend. I knew that one of them was going to come off because it was the one that they'd been having trouble with, but I wanted both. And it was good to see that we actually managed to do that. We got both of the teeth off. I mean, one of them did just fall off, but you know, that's the way that goes. So that was good fun, and I did enjoy that fight. But it leaves us with some upgrades that we need to do. So we need to have some way of self-riding. That's just a thing that we need to do. And we need to run the whole robot back up on 6S so that we can get the weapon speed back up again, and so we can get the reliability. Also, I'm probably going to ditch these motors and go to a censored one because I'm already running a VESC to actually run the drive. So I might as well put a sensor on there and get better startup torque on my weapon so I can really kill those weapon startup issues. But I don't know right now if that is what I want to do. I don't actually know if I'm going to build very obvious version 2, because those upgrades and improvements will mean scrapping the chassis and starting again, because like some of those things I have to have a new chassis to do that for. So I don't know if I want to do that or if I want to build a brand new robot. I've got some interesting ideas and concepts going on in my brain that would make some really interesting featherweights, but at the same time, there is a nugget, there is a core of a good robot sitting in here somewhere that I could dig back out again. So I don't really know. If you've made it this far in the video, please let me know what you think I should be doing, whether I should be trying to get this guy a version 2, or if I should be putting some time and effort into building something that potentially has an even longer reach than this and will hit a little bit harder, but potentially be more of a glass cannon. I don't know. Let me know, and we'll have a bit of a think about it. Yeah. Anyway, I hope you guys have enjoyed this one. Like I said at the start of the video, if you want more Nationals, I will link to Harley's channel in the description and at the end of the video, so go over there and check him out. I'm sure he will have a video out on Nationals as well at some point in the future. Yeah, and I hope you enjoyed this one, and I will see you in the next video.